Awesome. All right. I am James Davenport, the Associate Dean for Social Sciences and a Professor of Political Science at Rose State College. As many are aware, debates around the topic of school choice proposals are swirling and intensifying at the state legislature, and there is a serious political battle shaping up over this issue during this legislative session. I know many people who have been watching the debate have had trouble separating fact from fiction over this topic. And so the heated and partisan rhetoric used by both sides has not been overly helpful to discerning what is accurate in these matters. In my position, I felt like I had an opportunity to help clarify some things. And so along with several others, including the members who are on this panel discussion today, I helped organize a virtual conference on the topic of school choice. This includes a variety of pre-recorded sessions that are going to be released later today and tomorrow, covering different aspects of this. But this panel discussion was important to me to offer a kind of a discussion between contrasting perspectives that could be informational to the public. And so that's one of the things that I felt was really important and kind of lacking in most of the discussions that I've seen and heard either on social media or in news clips and such. And so that was really important to me to have this out here. Now, one of the reasons why school choice discussions generate such heated emotions and rhetoric is that it touches on a couple of really important social questions. Questions such as, what type of education will produce individuals who can live meaningful, productive, and virtuous lives? And another question on the back end of that is, and who gets to decide what that education is going to be? Another important wrinkle is that while we all want our children to have the best education, we don't all necessarily agree on what we mean by that term. And so that causes a lot of differences, and it causes a lot of discussion about how we structure a education system that can meet sometimes varying goals and sometimes conflicting goals that people within the public have. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to make it clear, I have been and remain an advocate of expanding school choice options in our state. I've had the opportunity to experience education from just about every possible way our state has to offer it during my life. And this has caused me to believe that a family should have a wide range of options for choosing how and where to educate their children, and that the state should facilitate their ability to choose, not be an obstacle to it. However, having stated that, my role during this discussion is not to be an advocate. My role during this discussion is to facilitate a conversation amongst individuals who, quite frankly, have far more direct experience in education policy than I do. In effect, my job today is going to be playing referee, and we all know that referees rarely come out of any event with people saying, what a great job they did. So I will do my best nonetheless. I believe the people on this panel are contributing to a discussion the public needs and deserves on this issue, one that is fact-based and isn't designed to inflame emotions and heated partisan rhetoric that I mentioned earlier. Their contribution to this discussion deserves a great deal of gratitude, regardless of their individual positions on this issue. The format of this conversation will go along these lines for those of you who are observers. After I introduce the panelists, each one will have 7 to 8 minutes in which to offer some opening comments on the topic of education in general and school choice more specifically. Following that, I have some prepared questions for the panelists. And afterwards, we will open up the discussion for those observers who would like to ask questions to the panelists. That does bring me to one last request. If you're an observer, please keep your mic muted during the discussion so that we don't have interruptions or a lot of background noise going on. If you do have a question you would like to ask, I want to encourage you to use that chat feature here in Zoom to type your question in. And if you post it there, I will do my best to get through all of them within the time that we have allotted to us for our discussion today. All right, having said all of that, let me introduce our panelists to you. Lucia Frohling is the Scholarships and Opportunities Coordinator for Every Kid Counts Oklahoma, also known as ECHO, that's EKCO. Lucia is a former public school teacher with a background in nonprofit development. Her passion for helping parents ensure their children have access to resources was ignited after her 2 younger children were diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. She and her husband realized that their current school couldn't provide them with the help they needed, and so they enrolled them in a private school that teaches them the way they learn best. Their oldest child continues to flourish in his public school. Lucia is committed to empowering parents across the state of Oklahoma to champion their child's education. So welcome, Lucia, and wave so everybody will make sure everybody sees you. All right, very good. Next, we have Melissa Abdo. Melissa has been involved with Oklahoma education policy, both professionally and in a volunteer capacity for the past decade. As a volunteer, Melissa serves on the executive board of the Oklahoma Parent Legislative Action Committee, a grassroots organization working to inform and engage parents about education legislation affecting their child's education. Melissa was elected to the Jinx Board of Education in February of 2013 and is on the board of directors for the Oklahoma State School Board Association. In addition to her passion for public education advocacy, she is active in several voter and civic engagement initiatives in her community. Melissa, thank you for joining us and being with us today. Next, we have Jenny White. Jenny has a master's degree in biology and has taught public school from both the college to the 7th grade levels. She has also taught 3 of her own children through graduation and scores of others through their homeschool co-op. A freelance writer, she has written numerous published articles and technical papers. Jenny has also studied and written about federal, state, and local education policy for over a decade, during which time she's also proposed, written, and analyzed education legislation. From 2017 to 2021, Jenny served as the elected mayor of the town of Luther and oversaw an increase in the municipal revenues from $135,000 annually to just over $1 million. Jenny and her husband have been married since 1997 and have 5 children. Jenny, thank you for being with us today. Next is Gabrielle Jacoby. Gabrielle joined the Oklahoma Policy Institute as its Child Wellbeing Policy Analyst and Kids Count Coordinator in March 2021, after more than 2 years as a program coordinator at the Oklahoma Partnership for School Readiness. Born and raised in Oklahoma City, Gabrielle earned her Bachelor of Science degree in journalism with a minor in Spanish language and literature from the University of Kansas. While there, she worked for 4 years as KU's Center of Public Partnerships and Research, which spurred a passion for child advocacy and showed the impact that public policy and programming can have on families. Currently, she is working on her Master of Public Administration and Graduate Certificate in Disaster Management from the University of Central Oklahoma. She lives in Oklahoma City, where she proudly cheers on both the Kansas Jayhawks. I don't know if that's going to win you a lot of fans today, Gabrielle, I'm just saying, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, which will redeem you, I think, with our audience today, their basketball teams. So thank you, Gabrielle, for being with us today. Finally, we have Ryan Haney. Ryan is the Criminal Justice Reform Fellow and General Counsel for the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. Prior to joining OCPA, he practiced law in Oklahoma City. Ryan holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Oklahoma and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Oklahoma's College of Law. He is currently pursuing a master's degree in Austrian economics from Mises Graduate School. Ryan and his wife, Jacqueline, live in Oklahoma City with their 3 daughters. Ryan, thank you also for being with us today. So we're going to let each of our panelists have, as I mentioned, about 7 to 8 minutes to offer their initial comments on this topic before we get into some discussion. So Lucia, you are up first.
Well, thank you for having me today. No pressure to be a part of such an esteemed panel of experts. So I just want to thank you all for being here and for allowing me the opportunity. And for those listening at home or later, thank you for caring so much about education in Oklahoma. And I think that we all agree on more than we disagree on. So as was stated, I'm a Scholarship and Opportunities Coordinator for Every Kid Counts Oklahoma, which is abbreviated as ECHO. At ECHO, we have one goal: to provide a quality education to all Oklahoma students by partnering with education-centered organizations across the state and providing a platform for teachers, parents, business, and community leaders to bring positive changes to our schools, ones that work to meet the unique needs of each student. Innovative education solutions are needed now in Oklahoma, and we believe that better education is a foundation for a better Oklahoma. As a scholarship and opportunities coordinator, the majority of my time is spent in my role as a master IEP coach, assisting families all across the state, the majority of whom are in our public schools. I assist parents through the educational evaluation, 504, and IEP processes to ensure that their student is equipped with every available resource to fully access their education and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living. My goal is always to show parents how to use their own voice to positively advocate for their child and their education, and to be treated as equal members of the IEP team. ECHO is able to offer a wide range of resources to parents. Some parents merely need help knowing how to start the evaluation process. Others need help drafting letters, reviewing their child's IEP, or attending meetings with them. The biggest compliment that I get is when a parent I have helped refers me to someone else for assistance. We have found really great success in approaching special education in a collaborative way, which has led to school leaders and doctors, as well as other organizations such as the Down Syndrome Association, reaching out to ask for our help with parents that they serve. And that is my greatest privilege and honor, is just sharing information. We have an ever-growing parent resource page, Every Kid Counts Oklahoma.org, and you can go to our website and see all of our parent resources. And we have a library of free downloads, including 504 and IEP snapshots that parents can show their teachers, example parent concern letters, an IEP checklist, as well as positive phrases and curious questions for parents to use in their meetings themselves that can kind of open the door to understanding, and that can help lead to meaningful change when used at the IEP table. And sorry, I misspoke at our website. It's everykidcountsok.org. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. So ECHO has a three-pronged approach to education. So I'm going to address two problem areas with two of the groups we partner with. So the first is our business and community leaders. When it comes to education, Oklahoma businesses want the same things that we do: improve schools that empower their teachers and elevate their students, which in turn allow communities to flourish. Businesses need a skilled workforce that is ready to step into a fast-paced world of ever-changing needs. And these are foundational skills needed for any career path. In addition to those, schools need to give students access to a multitude of career options and assist them in building a path forward to whatever future that child chooses to pursue. And our teachers need school choice too. Educators should have easy and equitable access to professional development opportunities to further their knowledge and expertise in the classroom. ECHO respects and values our teachers, and I know everyone on this panel does as well. We host a teacher roundtable at ECHO so we can obtain open and honest feedback about the challenges and successes occurring in the classroom and school community. And in these roundtables, we do discuss pending legislation to see if what's being proposed will have a positive impact in the classroom level, and to receive feedback that we can pass along of how those bills can be improved. And of course, our teachers need support. Every teacher, whether they're new to the profession or just new to their district, should be paired with a mentor to help them acclimate to that school and their community. Their voices matter and are deserving of our respect and support. ECHO is honored to be able to partner with local businesses across the state and match donated funds to grant directly to innovative classroom teachers to use in the ways that they see fit. So I want to explain a little bit on how educational choice fits into the picture of education in Oklahoma from our perspective. So students are accessing their education in more diverse ways than ever before, but there's more work to do to expand educational opportunities for all families. We want to ensure that every student has access to every opportunity for success, and providing freedom in education allows students access to the educational pathway that best fits their needs, and to not necessarily be locked in by their assigned zip code or school district. Oklahoma currently offers K through 12 students and their families several types of school choice, including two private school choice programs like the Oklahoma Equal Opportunity Educational Scholarships Tax Credit Scholarship and the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship to Students with Disabilities program. as well as charter schools, magnet schools, homeschooling, and interdistrict public school choice via an open enrollment policy with our open transfers. I know that before it's been said that open transfer would be detrimental to our school districts, and this is not proven to be true from my perspective. It has served to expand opportunities as evidenced by the more than 10,000 students who took advantage of it. However, a lot of our desirable school districts simply don't have seats available. And we also heard some of the same narrative before in regards to the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship when it first started, as well as the Oklahoma Equal Opportunity Scholarship opportunity. So LNH, just for those that don't know, or Lindsay Nicole Henry, authorizes a parent or guardian of a public school student with a disability who has served under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and who spent the prior school year enrolled in an Oklahoma public school to exercise their parental option and request to have an LNH scholarship awarded for their child to attend a participating private school approved by the State Board of Education. It also authorizes scholarship eligibility for any student who's been on an individual service plan through the Department of Human Resources, a child of a military family who had a permanent change of station orders, who had IDA services in another state, a child who's been served through Sooner Start and has been determined eligible for school district services, a child in out-of-home placement through the Office of Juvenile Affairs, as well as a student who's been in out-of-home placement with the Department of Human Services or has been adopted while in permanent custody of DHS. So according to edchoice.org, Oklahoma's current voucher and tax credit scholarships account for $14.7 million, which is 0.22% of Oklahoma's combined program and public K-12 current expenditures of $6.6 billion. The Oklahoma Scholarship Fund helps low-income families bridge the financial gap between what they can afford and what is best suited for their student with specialized pre-K through 12 education. And this program helps kids of all backgrounds, from those who struggle with bullying and behavior challenges to learning disabilities, substance abuse, and homelessness. Just to give full disclosure, the Oklahoma Equal Opportunity Scholarship also extends to public schools and public school foundations that choose to take advantage of it, which I think is wonderful. Any taxpayer who makes a contribution to an eligible public school foundation or public school district and makes a written commitment to contribute that same amount for an additional year is also eligible for the same tax credit as those who contribute to a private scholarship granting organization. Schools that accept these funds must maintain full and accurate records on contributions, expenditures, and other documentation required by the state. So that's for OSF, as well as the equal opportunities at public schools are granted, as well as LNH. So they do have that mechanism of having accountability and how they're spending their dollars. So the perspective that we take on school choice is we want to increase awareness on key pieces of legislation that directly impact parents, students, and teachers, as well as our business and community leaders. We want to make sure that parents know that they have an equal voice in their child's education and to use that voice as they see appropriate. We also want to know our policymakers. I feel some of them may feel trapped into supporting the establishment education system that serves many Oklahoma students, but sometimes does fall short of meeting the needs of some of our most underserved populations in need of our help to a pathway to a successful life. At ECHO, we are steadfast in our commitment to putting students first before any system of the past, and our mission is clear. Every child deserves a quality education. We want to expand educational opportunities and choice as a pathway to bright futures for our students and for a better, stronger Oklahoma. Parents know their children best, and currently, where they send their students to be educated and where they want to send their students to be educated don't always match up. We want to expand choices to narrow this gap. At ECHO, we know that the more people know about and understand education choice, the more that they can help advance the movement and advocate for positive change if they so desire for high quality education choice programs. We also know from experience, change is hard. It's hard for everyone. It's hard for me as a mom, it's hard for my kids. But we know that bringing new school choice programs to fruition, it takes a lot of work and a lot of collaboration and us all working together at the table, all of us here too. And we know it faces long odds in places where allegiances to the past are really strong. We want to make sure our students come first. And we know that together we can all make impactful change in Oklahoma that serves the best interest of every student. And I really believe, and at ECHO, we believe in collaboration. And I honor and respect the voices of everyone on this panel for helping our Oklahoma students. So thank
All right.
you for your time. Sorry, I kept looking down to that note because
No, that's good.
y'all are
Thank you.
intimidating panel. Thank you.
All right. We'll go next to Melissa.
Okay, hello everybody. It's so nice. I also want to extend greetings to everyone on the panel. It's wonderful to see familiar faces from, when I started my advocacy long ago, and some new faces. So I don't think that the issue of school choice has gotten any less robust in the 10 or 12 years that I've been around. So anyway, I appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity to with you all, model some civil discourse and understand that we will probably not all agree at the end of our time together, but that's okay. We're all open to the conversation. So for the first question about our organization's role, I'm like a lot of us, I wear several education hats, but for this purpose, I'm going to stick with Oklahoma Parent Legislative Action Committee, the OKPLAC, which is our nonpartisan grassroots organization that works to inform and engage parents on the legislation that affects their children at school. And really this started before I was around and involved. It probably started about 20 years ago with the former superintendent of Jinx, who would take some parents over to the Capitol and talk with the lawmakers. And then when my daughter, who's now a freshman in college, was in kindergarten, I had questions. Why are our classes so big? Why do things happen? And started really becoming interested in and learning more about how the decisions made at the Capitol affect my child's day at school. And so that's how I became involved, and we expanded to some other chapters. And then in 2018, we organized kind of an umbrella organization, OKPLAC, to help the we've got about 15 different local chapters, and really the goal and the purpose is to, number one, be nonpartisan, because we believe that education doesn't belong to Democrats, it doesn't belong to Republicans or independents, it belongs to all of us, and we're all equally passionate about it. Number two, what we started finding was that regardless of where your children are in school, if they're in an urban setting, suburban or rural, parents were all sending the same message, that they want quality public schools, they want their classrooms to be well resourced, and we want great teachers. And so we just kind of started to stick with those messages that everyone could agree on. And we think that's really important because approximately 90% of the children in Oklahoma attend a public school. So we feel like that's really where the state's focus should be. As far as what we view as the most important issues facing education in Oklahoma, some of our priorities this session remain the same. I mean, we're always concerned about funding, and as that relates to a lot of times, 90% of our school district's general fund is salary and benefits. So when we say funding, it's not just, oh, let's throw money at a problem. It's funding for people who we know the people are in place to serve our students and help meet those needs. And as everybody's well aware, we do have a teacher shortage in Oklahoma and across the nation right now. We also are seeing a shortage in staff positions. So anything from bus drivers to paraprofessionals to the people in the school building that help create that environment where students are able to learn at their best. So that when we talk about funding, that's what we're talking about, is funding for teachers and the people that are necessary to teach our kids. Another thing that we really believe strongly is that every student has a right to feel safe and welcome in their school building. Public schools exist for everyone. Every child has the right to walk in and receive an education, and that's really a foundation of our democracy, is to provide that opportunity for everyone. We don't get to choose the student. They walk in the door, and whether they're a behavior problem, no matter what their special needs might be. It's our requirement to meet those needs. And so that's where I just think the state's role in our organization believes that that's where our focus should be. How educational choice fits into the picture in Oklahoma, I think Lucia mentioned it before, we have an abundance of educational choice opportunities. And so I think our position, if I could take a step back and just say, we really start out of the gate by asking the question, what is the government's role in education? And I think that's an important question, because we get caught up a lot of times in some of the details of different programs and how they're going to be structured and sort of the fine print of it all. But if you take a step back and say, what is the government's role, the state's role in education? And, you know, a lot of people might agree that a constitution is a great place to start to look at that. And our constitution in Oklahoma says that the state's role is to fund the system of public schools that are free and open to all students of the state and free from sectarian control. And I think that's Article 1, Section 5. So, you know, that's it, a system of public schools. You don't have to take advantage of that system of public schools. Parents can choose to homeschool. They can choose to send their kids to private school. But as far as the government's role, the state's function in education is to provide that system of schools that everyone can choose if they desire to. And a long time ago, I heard an analogy that stuck with me, and it's been so long that I can't even give credit to the person that I first heard it from. But the analogy was there are a lot of things that we as taxpayers, as Oklahoma taxpayers, fund, and we don't necessarily use that personally. And an example would be like our public library system. I know that's not state money, that's local money, but you know, our local taxpayers fund a library system. You can choose to use that. They're wonderful. We encourage people to use that, but you may never step foot in a public library. You may prefer to go privately purchase your books from Barnes and Noble. And that's great too. You know, for a variety of different reasons, but you don't then get to say, I would like my library money, my taxes that I pay to support the library, back in the form of a voucher to apply to my Barnes and Noble purchase. So it really, and in our organization, it comes down to public education isn't a pay as you use it kind of a thing. This is something that our Constitution requires of all of us as taxpayers. This is what we do for the children of our state, is we fund a system of public schools that everyone can attend. And it's really, you know, after that, then it feels like we get caught up in a lot of various details, which are, you know, I look forward to discussing with the rest of the panel. So school choice exists in Oklahoma. And in fact, we are the #1 state in our region for sending public dollars to support private education. And so we are just asking for that same distinction for funding of public schools. And we already do that, public dollars going to private schools. And I'm glad that Lucia mentioned the accountability and transparency. We absolutely support that, and would we always advocate for that to be the same levels of accountability and taxpayer, you know, accountability for the use of those taxpayer funds. So that's something that we think there's a gap there when you consider all of the things that public schools have to do to be accountable to the taxpayers. Rightfully so. This is the taxpayers' money. As a sitting board member, I take that responsibility very seriously. But through open meetings, open records request, the OCAS system, you know, the state testing program, everything that we have to do to let the public know, be very transparent with the funding, those things don't exist in many of they don't exist to the same degree or to the same level in many of the school choice options when we start talking about public money being taken outside of that public school system and used for private school tuition. I didn't even start timing myself. I might if somebody needs to get the cane and like pull me off, if I go out this way, you'll see why. But the perspective that our organization takes on school choice legislation, I think I just wrapped it up there. Our focus is on making our public schools. We believe that our state government should focus on making our public schools the very best that they can be, since 90% of our Oklahoma children attend public schools.
All right. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Mhm.
Next, we will be going to Jenny White.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me, James. I appreciate that, and I really appreciate being able to sit on this panel and listen to everybody and have this discussion. I am the education coordinator for Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment. We've been around since about 2008. We are a nonprofit organization. We're regulated by a board, and one of our board members actually is the Oklahoma coordinator for parentalrights.org. We got into this originally because of the fact that all of the parents that sit on our board have been very, very involved with their children's education. And we all realize how important education is, not just to the student, but to the family, and then also society as a whole. I mean, it is a huge responsibility educating children. And that's pretty much the reason why we made education policy kind of our priority. I think right now what we're dealing with is the fact that kind of parents tend to feel, I think they're feeling locked out of their kids' educations. They seem to kind of have trouble knowing how to get involved, or then they're not sure, they kind of don't feel comfortable taking on the role of primary educator, or they don't even actually know how to be the primary educator of their kids. And, we talk to a lot of parents, and oftentimes parents will say things like, yeah, I don't like what's going on, but I'm afraid to speak out for fear that my kid's going to be bullied by another kid, or possibly an administrator or a teacher or something. And so they don't really say anything. And then what ends up happening then is the school kind of becomes a wedge between the parent and the kid. And then and then kind of education stops. And the sad thing is that even kind of occurs in private school. For example, we had a board member whose daughter was in a private school, and she saw some curriculum coming out that she didn't like. And she went to talk to a board member about it, but in the private school, the board was private. They didn't have a public discussion. And so there wasn't a way to kind of wedge herself in there with the private school board and feel like her concerns were being addressed. So it's not just public school, it's private school kind of as well. And then kind of there's an overall lack of knowing who's in charge of a child's education, kind of by both the parent and then the school. And I think sometimes the school tends to maybe overdo it a little bit. And so then you end up having a situation where learning just kind of shuts down. And I think that's kind of a big reason that why our NAEP scores in Oklahoma are so low, and so many kids are not proficient in English and math. It just turns out to be a big headbutt, I think, where the learning isn't happening the way it needs to be. Because of all of these things, though, ROPE really believes our major focus is, and the reason why we're Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment is, we believe that parents hold the keys to the educational success of their children, and they should have every ability to educate their kids in any manner that works for them, whether it's public school, online school, private school, charter school. I mean, we have so many choices, as Melissa and Lucia both said. In Oklahoma, we have just huge choices for educating our children today. We have huge options. I mean, I had 5 kids. I've had kids in public school. I've had kids in private school co-op. I taught at a charter school. I had a kid in a charter school. So, I kind of know what it's like to be able to take advantage of some of those opportunities that we have. I think, though, there's a difference between school choice and what we call school choice. And I think so far we've kind of agreed, we have school choice. So what does school choice really mean then? Well, we believe it's a universal voucher system is kind of the euphemism that school choice is. And we actually looked at both of the Senate bills, the universal voucher bills in the Senate this year so far. Daniel's bill SB 822 and Jet's bill SB 943. And then I actually took those and I compared them with last year's Senate bill 1647. Really, they're essentially the same. There are just a few kind of tweaks here and there, but they're essentially the same. And I think possibly obviously now, we have huge problems with both the bills in very specific ways. But the bottom line is we don't believe in giving public money to private schools. That whole voucher concept we just completely disagree with. But the reason why we disagree with that is we feel that what will end up happening, we've already talked about transparency. What we think will end up happening is that private schooling options will eventually go away because they'll be subjected to government control. And so we'll have government schools, and public schools will be government schools and private schools will be government schools, because now they've entered into this public-private partnership where public money is going into the private school, and public money always comes with strings. You know, and it should, just like Melissa said, it should, because this is taxpayer funds. I mean, fraud is an issue, and people don't want their hard-earned tax dollars being spent on something that isn't effective, isn't going for the right thing, isn't being done what said it was supposed to be doing. And we kind of see the whole taxpayer strings thing. If you go back to the ARPA funds, lots of schools applied for ARPA funds, and that ended up being, so if they applied for ARPA funds, they ended up having to create these COVID-19 safety plans. And those COVID-19 safety plans included mask wearing for the kids, even though we had a state law that said that public schools weren't required for kids to be masked in school. So it's kind of like take government money, play by government rules. And that kind, like I said, that kind of tends to make private schools government schools. And then where's the parent choice in that if all schools are public schools and there isn't an individual rule choice for privacy? And it's interesting because in an article today from OCPA, the superintendent Ryan Walters echoed this very same concern. And he said during a budget hearing, he was quoted as saying, "We've seen critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, transgender education pushed under the guise of federal dollars. You take this money and we have to do this to you." So that's kind of our argument there. And then specifically in the bill, section 3M of every single voucher bill says the agency may accept gifts and grants from any source to support administration of the ESA, advertise the ESA, or fund additional accounts. So right away, we're told in these voucher programs that any money's fair game, including, we have to assume then, federal funds. And if you go on later, even in the bill, section 5 says that the treasurer's revolving fund for the education savings accounts should consist of all monies received by the office of the state treasurer from appropriations, gifts, grants, donations, and bequests. So again, federal funding is not excluded from that formula. So if you even stop there and just go on, so all bills expand government by 6 to 7 sections of new law apiece. They increase the duties of the treasurer's office by at least 20 over what they have now. And Daniel's bill includes an additional $274 million in OSDE appropriations to public schools, which then further expands the budget. And I would have to say, the more government takes, the less families have to use to educate their kids. So that's kind of our bottom line.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. All right. Now we have Ryan Haney from OCPA, who will wrap up this portion of our panel.
I think you might want to let Ms. Jacoby go first.
Thank you. I'll get started. I know we've got questions to get to, so I'll try and be brief. But yes, I'm Gabrielle Jacoby. I'm the Child Wellbeing Policy Analyst and Kids Count Data Coordinator at the Oklahoma Policy Institute. We are a nonpartisan think tank that works to advance equitable and fiscally responsible policies that expand opportunity for all Oklahomans through nonpartisan research, analysis, and advocacy. So as part of my work with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, I've spent the past summer and fall hosting listening sessions truly in all corners of the state, talking to parents, teachers, service providers, community leaders about child well-being and what it's like raising a family in Oklahoma right now, both the challenges and successes. We talked a lot about education, and I can tell you how many times school choice or private school vouchers came up in those countless conversations across the state, and it was not once. But what parents were talking to me about was how they're working multiple jobs just to make ends meet and can't spend time with their children in the evenings or help with homework. I had parents tell me about children with a chronic illness who have to drive, hours and miss days of school just to see a doctor because there isn't a healthcare provider in their region. I had teachers talk about how they're really concerned for their children's mental health right now and don't feel like they have the resources or services or knowledge to know how to best address and help them. And I heard from countless parents talking about how their after school programming or transportation got cut due to budget restraints, and now they don't feel like they have a safe place for their child in the evenings when they're at work. Unfortunately, the data backs up these anecdotes. Oklahoma in 2022 ranked 40th overall for child well-being, 41st for family and community, 42nd in health, and 45th in education, which is, of course, is what we're talking about today. While our education outcomes are definitely low, they don't exist in a bubble. Our children experience much higher rates of poverty and trauma and worse health outcomes than their peers in neighboring states. And so until we address those issues too, the odds will remain stacked against many Oklahoma children until we make meaningful investments to improve all areas of child well-being. Private school vouchers are not going to help improve any of these things. Currently, there are 45 counties in Oklahoma that don't have a private school, and this represents about 60% of all Oklahomans. Private school vouchers not only harm public schools, but they also leave students and communities worse off than before. They harm student academic achievement, fail rural students, and leave low-income students behind while also damaging state and local budgets. They're a poor investment for our communities, and they don't save money because they require the state to fund a separate education system. Public education, however, serves many vital purposes. It serves communities and reduces inequalities, forges common experience, and strengthens our democracy. Public education prepares all students to contribute to our country, serve as active citizens, and participate in our democracy by voting and becoming active in other ways. So it's not just a education; it really is a public good. Private school vouchers, however, divert public resources away from the public schools to fund the education of a few students at private schools, which overall will weaken our public education system. So because of its proven ineffectiveness, its drain on state budgets and high cost to the taxpayers, and the fact that it will harm a majority of Oklahoma students, private school vouchers are bad policy for Oklahoma families and students. And if we really want to make meaningful investments in education, it really needs to be a holistic investment that uplifts the whole child and their family and empowers everyone to live a life that allows them to thrive within their own communities.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I appreciate that. And I apologize again for skipping my order. That was very bad of me. I set the order and then I completely ignored it. I apologize. All right, next and now last of our panelists is Ryan Haney with the OCPA. Ryan, thank you for being with us and go ahead.
Thanks for having me, Professor Davenport, and apologies to the earlier speakers. If I was yawning a lot, my wife has been sick, and so I haven't been getting a lot of sleep the last couple nights. But as Professor Davenport mentioned, I am the General Counsel and Criminal Justice Reform Fellow at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs. And for 30 years, OCPA has been the state's free market think tank, advocating for our principles of limited government, free enterprise, individual initiative, and personal responsibility. When we were founded 30 years ago, we were focused primarily on economic issues like lowering or eliminating the state income tax and working on reforming workers' comp. But somewhere around the turn of the century, OCPA decided it would be a good idea to start working on education issues. And after all, education is the second largest budget item in the state. So if we're going to spend so much money on education, we decided to ask questions about what should we expect from education. And here are a few of the things that we are currently getting from our public education system. Instead of academic excellence, we are seeing a decline in the quality of education. There are physical dangers, including, and people have mentioned bullying and fights and that sort of thing. It's an environment that is often not conducive to learning. There are growing costs. And instead of fostering assimilation and harmony, they are actually serving to further fragment our society through different insidious ideologies. So at OCPA, we think that the biggest issues facing education in Oklahoma are poor academic outcomes. Like I said, this sort of creeping ideology that fractures and divides students into classes of oppressors and oppressed, as well as ballooning costs. Now, what I'll say at the outset, there's something that might be controversial, but ultimately, there's a lot that can be said about this. But I don't think that this is a Republican or a Democrat thing. I mean, I agree to that extent with some of the people that have spoken before me. For us, it's ultimately about freedom. And so the reality for me is that, and this can't be overstated, and that's one of the reasons I love the title of this panel, Free to Choose, that even if outcomes didn't improve and even if costs didn't go down, having choices is always a better option. It's always better. So having said that, it's not hard to see that when in our everyday lives, when people are allowed to enter a free market and they're allowed choices, prices tend to fall and quality tends to improve. Likewise, when government grants a monopoly or monopoly power to an institution, as it has done with public education, prices tend to rise and quality tends to drop. But in reality, there are certainly parents out there that test scores are not what's really important to them, and that's one of the reasons I say that. I was in a meeting with a charter school superintendent not long ago, and for the parents of the children that he serves, safety is their number one issue. And so, you know, one of the fundamentals of praxeology, if you will, is human action. This idea that humans act based on their own self-interest. And, you know, there are people out there who are willing to pay $22,000 for a Taylor Swift ticket. I would never do that. And so we have people who value things differently. Some of us value educational outcomes. Some of us value, worldview matters or issues that are taught to our students, while others value safety. And not one of those things is necessarily better than the other. We ultimately think that it's best to leave it up to parents to decide what it is that affects their decision in how they choose to raise and educate their children. So while we have a few school choice bills that have been introduced this year, and they've already been discussed to some degree, there are a number of House shell bills. So it's possible that before session starts next week, we may actually even see some additional bills crop up. Senator Daniels' bill, Senate Bill 822, the Oklahoma Education Freedom Act, has already been talked about, as well as Senator Jett's Senate Bill 943. Both of those are universal to some degree. The Jett bill is less universal. It starts with caps on population. Both of them would apportion the state aid portion to the family to use as they see fit for their own children. They're expansive in coverage. They do call for audits, so that transparency piece that's been mentioned now several times is there. They do maintain the independence and autonomy of those providers in an effort to maximize freedom. So there are some other bills. Senator Bullard has a tax credit bill that It's kind of like with tax cuts. Our position is that there's never a bad tax cut, but some are better than others. And so in a year where there seem to be some real robust choices on the table, there are the Senator Jett and Senator Daniels bill are the ones that we think give parents the best opportunity to choose what's right for their students.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. I have some questions that I had prepared and forwarded to the panelists before today, so they could have whatever response that they would like to put up without me putting them on the spot, so to speak. I think that's only fair in this kind of environment to do that. So I'm going to run through some of these questions. We already have some folks who have asked some questions on the chat, so I will get to those after we run through this list of prepared questions. I do want to make one point. Ryan kind of hinted on this or alluded to this, is that there are different funding sources for our education system, right? And you guys are all steeped in this much more than I am, but the three broad ones that I'll just mention, right? There is the state appropriated amount, right? The funds that come from the state legislature. And that makes up I think the bulk of funding, but certainly not all of it. Another good chunk comes from property taxes. So property taxes that are distributed to local school districts through the county. So there's another portion of funding. And then finally, the federal funding that Jenny mentioned earlier. There's a portion, I think federal funding in Oklahoma schools, again, if I'm incorrect, somebody jump in here and tell me, but maybe about 8 to 10% of total funds that get spent on education come from federal sources. So I just want to, as we're discussing this and people are like, well, where does this, we might all think that the legislature provides all the money for that, but that's not really how this process works. And I just wanted to clarify that in case anybody had a question about where exactly the funding for our schools come from. All right, so question number one I have, and this is something that has been mentioned by a couple of folks already, but Oklahoma as a state does have a fairly liberated educational choice environment. Families can choose from among various public, private, and homeschool options currently. And when it comes to those private and homeschool options, the state has a very light regulatory hand on those. And I'm, from my perspective, as things set up, I think that's probably a good thing. Not everybody agrees, but I think overall that's probably a good thing. But it does have this kind of very light regulatory oversight of those efforts. For those who support educational choice legislation that we've been discussing, right? My question to you is, given this already existing environment, why is it necessary to expand those options, especially through the mechanisms of that we've been discussing, vouchers or ESAs? And I know people use that term synonymously. I think technically there is a difference between the two. If anybody wants to address that, feel free to do so, or some other mechanism. Some states have opted for some type of tax credit mechanism rather than either of those other proposals. But why is it necessary to expand on what we have is my question for you. For those who are opposed to the school choice expansion, my question to you is, since we already have this very liberated environment, why would expanding that through these mechanisms, how would that, in your opinion, dramatically alter the environment that already exists? So two sets of questions for two different groups. Whoever wants to jump in first, I think I'll let Ryan and or Lucia go first, because they have been the ones that most strongly are supporting kind of the proposals that are out there. I'll let them answer, and then I'll come to the other three, if that's okay.
Yeah, I don't mind starting if that's easier. So I want to start by just saying, I don't care whether I agree with you, Professor Davenport. There is a legal distinction that is arguably less important than it used to be between vouchers and ESAs. I don't care if we call it a voucher. I don't care if we call it an ESA or a muffin. It doesn't matter to me. Like, I want to give parents choices. I think it's important to start with the idea that government has nothing that it doesn't first take by force from individuals and families. So if we're going to take from families and individuals to educate kids or educate the public, I mean, I think that's sort of the, Ms. Abdo brought this up earlier, you know, what is government's role? You know, I believe the government's role is to educate the public, right? To make sure that we have an educated citizenry. And so, you know, as far as the, you know, that constitutional provision, I think that's a floor. I think that's a great place to start constitutionally. But the Constitution certainly doesn't say that we can't go above and beyond that. And so, you know, I've been blessed with my wife to put our kids in private school, to homeschool them. I feel very fortunate that we've been able to do that. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to take the options that we have been able to provide our kids and extend those options to other kids that are not as fortunate for whatever reason, be it a socioeconomic issue or a location issue or whatever. And so ultimately, the reason this needs to be expanded is because there are not enough options for those types of people yet. I believe if we open up a market, we'll see new and innovative groups to come in and fill that market. So that's why I think that they should be expanded, despite the fact that I love the fact that we do already have a lot of options. I just don't think they're available to that many people, leaving people with a choice that for many people is functionally non-existent.
Lucia?
Yes. So I want to say that I am definitely not an either or person. I am a both and person. And when I have the opportunity, our family uses that. We use both public and private because our students have different needs, and the families that we serve at ECHO have different needs that vary. And some of those needs aren't being met, and there's not a place for those kids. And that keeps me up at night. I want to make sure, like everyone here at this panel, that every student has every opportunity to succeed. And that as a whole, that there are all these wonderful and great options that we can just continue to make better and to make more of that can help meet every single student's needs. And I know everyone here, I mean, like I said, we agree more than we disagree on. And I think we can all agree on wanting what's best for students first and foremost. And there are multiple school settings where students are educated. There's public, private, home, online, charter, micro, there is a wealth of options. But for many families, for some that we serve and that I've heard from all across the state, there's still not a choice for them between educational options. The ability to choose where and how your child is educated is greatly limited to families with means and support, Ryan and my own included. Low-income families, students with special learning needs, of which I have two, students in rural areas, minority students in suburban areas with many private schools that have wait lists, kids in overcrowded urban schools, single-parent households, students in foster care, students living in non-traditional households, all experience limited options, and in many cases, no options when it comes to where and how they will be educated. And the state does have an obligation, absolutely, to educate all of our students, regardless of their demographic, their learning style, or their beliefs. And I agree that our public schools do a great job of serving a majority of our students. But there are students slipping through that are not receiving the education they deserve. And that is where my heart is. And those needs that are not being met. And if we say our current options are sufficient, and that if we expand choice programs to offer choice to all students is unnecessary, it seems that the message we may be unintentionally sending is that we're limiting choices to privileged families and students, and that that's okay. And that as a state, it's sufficient to knowingly leave students unserved. And I know no one on this panel wants that. Studies have shown that students participating in choice programs are more likely to graduate, enroll in college, and make progress in college. And beyond the beliefs of students receiving school choice through voucher and scholarship programs, studies show that public schools improve when private school choice programs are introduced to the market. Research suggests that when families have more options and there's greater competition between schools, that the benefits are realized in both public and private schools, which only helps our students. Reading, math, and reading, English, and math proficiency scores in public schools trend upwards the more private options are available and the more students are eligible to participate. So again, I know everyone on this panel, we all have different viewpoints and different places where we get our research and our data, but one fact remains that, again, I know we all agree on, and I will say I tend to be sunshine and rainbows and believe in collaboration and look forward to working with all of you, is that we all want the best for Oklahoma students. And I think together we can really figure out a way to get there. Thank you.
Lucia, I was just going to ask, and I will make the same request of anyone else who, when you mention some of those studies that you mentioned, if you have the ability to either post links to those in our chat or to email those to me, and I can put them up when the video goes live. I'd love to be able to provide for anyone who is going to cite any kind of studies or research. I'd love to be able to provide that so people can look through those themselves as well, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. I will send those. It's a very long list.
That's okay.
I have compiled, so I'll send that in case people, I'll send it to you so it can be sent out. So just for those that know, like I'm not spouting it off, and I'll be happy to share those with Professor Davenport so those can be sent out. Because the more you know, and I would love y'all's research too, because I think it's the more we know, and having varying viewpoints and various sources is really important. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucia. All right, let's switch over to our other three who, and my question again to you guys is, given that we already do have this very a variety of options that are available, how is it that this one more step into providing those is going to dramatically impact the state or education in your perspective? So that's my question, and I'll let whoever wants to jump in first do so. Jenny, go ahead.
Okay, I will. So that's kind of the $64,000 question, honestly, if you ask me, because if we already have school choice, why do we need that extra thing? And I think the thing that we're kind of really concerned about is this. You know, we're talking about, you know, students having access, and we say, well, but students don't have access to this, you know, or that or the other thing. Well, we keep forgetting that we actually do. I mean, we do have the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship for kids who have disabilities, and we also have the Opportunity Scholarship Fund. And that is just private people, you know, donating money, usually for tax credit, to help kids that need to move on into a private school situation or something else. I think the trick here is when does it become more of a socialistic thing when we're giving taxpayer dollars to people to do they couldn't ordinarily do with their own funds. And, you know, again, the large size of government kind of speaks to that. But one of the things I got some data from, and I'll actually say what it is, so that it came from the U.S. Department of Education, Congressional Research Service, and the College Board. And this was for selected years 1976 to 2008. So it's, you know, from some time ago, but they point out that Pell Grants, which are essentially vouchers for college, has actually, as Pell Grants, the amount of Pell Grants have increased, so has the tuition to college. And I think what you're going to end up doing with a voucher situation is actually pricing kids out of, I mean, families that maybe ordinarily would have just been able to eke by, you know, a private school tuition is not going to be able to do it once tuitions rise, because now the state is actually giving them, you know, money from the state coffers in order to be able to get more kids in there. And then tuition is just like, I mean, you can look at the data yourself, but from 1976 to 2008, as the Pell Grant awards have gone up, so has the total cost. And you can kind of see that reflected in a lot of things when government money kind of comes in. Well, I mean, you can look again at, the COVID-19 funds that were injected. I just read an article the other day about in Forbes, and I will try to find that for you, but it was in Forbes, and it talked about how private equity firms got a lot of the dollars that came in because they could afford to apply for it and knew how to apply for these funds. And then what ended up happening was they took that money and then just turned around and crushed their competitors who either couldn't apply for the loans or had other reasons that they couldn't compete. So this idea and notion that we're going to create some kind of competition that isn't already there among private schools, I don't know. I mean, COVID was very instructive on levels, and one of them was what happens when public money goes to private industry. So I'll just leave that there.
Jenny, I wanted to clarify and make sure I understood the study you mentioned from the College Board and Department of Education. That was looking at higher education, specifically the Pell Grants and such. Is that correct?
It was titled Federal Pell Grants, Maximum Awards and Total College Costs.
Okay. All right.
And again, it was U.S. Department of Ed, Congressional Research Service, and the College Board.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I caught that correctly. Thank you.
Sure.
Does Gabrielle Gabrielle, go ahead.
Yeah, so like so many have already touched on, Oklahoma has a really robust, options for Oklahoma children and their families. I think Melissa kind of said this earlier, but we as a state in 2021 spent nearly double the amount on private choice than our 5 neighboring states combined. And evidence has shown that vouchers it's not a magic cure-all for our education system. They don't private school vouchers, ESAs, whichever you want to call them, don't adequately serve low-income students because the cost of tuition, fees, and materials generally exceeds the amount of the voucher. So we're already seeing the results of this. In Wisconsin, in their voucher program, 75% of students who utilized it were already attending private school. That number is 80% in Arizona and 89% in New Hampshire. And of course, I'd be happy to send you that data after this. But this shows that vouchers serve wealthier kids whose parents could already afford tuition and leaves our underserved kids in public schools with even fewer resources than they had before. Again, 45 counties in Oklahoma lack a private school option, which represents 59% of all Oklahomans. And vouchers drain, funding from rural school districts to pay for the school vouchers for predominantly urban and suburban students. Public schools, meanwhile, are a vital part of our economic and social fabric, especially in our rural areas. So vouchers really threaten rural communities as a whole. Private school vouchers are often sold as an opportunity for students and families to choose the school they want to attend, when in reality, vouchers give the choice to private schools because they determine who can and cannot attend. True school choice doesn't have to mean privatization. Public schools can offer a myriad of choices for children and their families, regardless of zip code or ability to pay, by giving students access to foreign language classes, magnet or theme schools, VOTEC programs, AP courses, apprenticeships, concurrent enrollment, in virtual options, all of these things. Our special education programs provide school psychologists, occupational and physical therapists, mental health services, behavioral specialists, nutrition services that really help ensure that all children can learn and grow. So public school offer choices in a variety of sports and extracurricular programs that keep kids in school and bring entire communities together. However, Oklahoma has been in the bottom 10 of this is always so hard to say, per pupil funding when it comes to public schools, which takes away a lot of true school choice for children and families, and will only be more difficult to provide true school choice through quality public schools if we keep cutting away at funding for public education.
Oh, Melissa?
Yes, okay, you're
yeah.
muted. I wasn't sure if you
I'm
were.
sorry, that was, yeah.
That's okay. Well, I'm glad that Gabrielle mentioned the that school choice is actually the private school's choice. I'll kind of go back to what I was mentioning earlier is what is the purpose of those funds? What is the purpose of the money that we have collected from taxpayers and is appropriated by the legislature regarding education? And that is to guarantee that every child in Oklahoma has the option to be educated. So that's why it funds a public school system that is free and open to all children in the state. Again, we have a lot of options. Parents are welcome. I'm related to people who have made other choices, homeschool, private school. But it's not the government's role to fund everyone's option for how they're going to educate their student. Because another thing I wanted to touch on is we hear a kind of a slogan about the money should follow the child, and that's not how that works, because the money it would create sort of a nanny state, almost to Jenny's point. If we are funding everyone at some point, the government, we can't afford that. And studies, I have some studies, and I'll send you the link, and the type is very, very small. So but I believe this is from the National Coalition for Public Education, NCPE, but analyzing different states that have voucher programs, and the majority of people who take advantage of that are already in private schools. So for example, Arizona, 80% of the voucher users are in private schools, 89% already in, 75% already in. So in essence, the government then starts funding a private choice that someone has already made. And when the vouchers don't cover the entirety of the tuition, then it just kind of becomes a coupon, a coupon for a discount on the public school. We have low income families that you could give them a voucher to a private school across town and they don't have transportation, or a parent has a different work schedule and can't get the child across town. So when we talk about serving low income students, there's a lot more than just saying here's a voucher to a private school. Number one, they have to be accepted to the private school, and number two, someone has to be available to make that commitment to get them there. So I get a little bit confused, with the accountability piece, because I don't think we've done a good job in Oklahoma with the school choice options that we've had as they've developed. I mean, we don't need to name names, but we all know of the largest abuse of taxpayer funds in the history of our state with an online virtual charter school. And we have some ongoing investigations right now with how funds that are intended to be used for education wind up being used for other purposes. So with the choice options that we have, as far as sending public money to private schools, we don't have a great track record of that being transparent and accountable to the public. So that would be my reason for why do we need to not grow it, because I don't think the ones that we have right now, we've done a great job with maintaining the same level of transparency and accountability to the public for using their money.
Just real quickly, if Ryan or Lucia would like to add anything, you guys we're outnumbered on this. That's just the way it worked. But I'll give you about 30 seconds each, or if one of you want to have anything you want to respond real quickly before we go on to the next question. No, everybody?
I'll just say I do appreciate all the perspectives. So thank you all. And I do respect and appreciate everyone's viewpoint and really want to work together for our students. Just to share my personal story, my husband and I could not have afforded private school. We utilized the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship for 2 of our children because they're dyslexic and their needs were not being met. And I had the opportunity to work with the district to help create change in our public school setting as well, because I do believe in both and. I want all kids to succeed. And I want to make sure that there are avenues for them, that if their school that they're in is not serving them, that they are able to get their needs fully met and to be able to succeed. So I know everyone has a personal story, but I just thought it was important for me to share my why. And for our public school, it fits our oldest grade, and we are so thrilled, and we love our public school system that we're in. And we also love the private school that two of our kids are in for what they need. So just for our family, it's a both and. Just wanted to share.
All right, thank
And
you.
Professor Davenport, I will just say, when it comes to the accountability question, I think it's important to talk about that a little bit, about who exactly are we accountable to, because in my mind, I'm certainly not going to quibble over what other groups may or may not have done, whether we're talking about, I don't mind naming names if we're talking about Epic or whatever. But I will say, I don't see any real accountability in the public schools either. They're certainly not accountable to parents. The only people that are really accountable in the public school system are football coaches. I mean, there's very few. We've seen in the last couple of years since COVID, like, the ability for people to go and affect change at their local school board is practically nil. I know there are a bunch of people on this call that have done a lot of work going to their school boards, only to have their school boards say, we're not going to listen to you. Anytime somebody brings up the idea of moving school board elections to the November ballot, that's shot down. We got to have it on a day in February when it's sleeting and snowing, and and they're subject to regulatory capture. So, might there be some issues with accountability in school choice programs? I mean, there very well could be, but I don't think that those are unique to public school choice programs.
All right, I'm going to go on to our next question, and then for sake of time, because we're already running a little bit longer than I anticipated, which, listen, I will run as long as you guys want to, but I know other people have other obligations besides enjoying our conversation. I'm going to combine a couple of these questions, and then we're going to throw it to our observers, those who are here who would like to ask. And if you would like to ask a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. I am going to ask you those, but please do not use the chat and crowd out questions by posting your own thoughts about everything that's said. I'd like to be able to find the questions relatively easy so I can ask them on behalf of you. So as of now, if you want to ask a question, if you got one on the tip of your tongue or you're on your mind, go ahead and type that in there, and I will get through as many of them as I possibly can. All right, so a couple of things that people have mentioned, and this always is something that is mentioned in relation to public education, whether we're talking about vouchers or we're talking about anything else, is funding, right? And I don't know that anyone has a huge disagreement that funding is always going to be an issue in relation to any type of education system that you have, right? If you're going to say you're going to have one, you've got to put resources into it for it to be effective, regardless of whether or not it has broad choice or little choice. You've got to have the funds to make it work. But one of the big objections that I personally have heard often offered in opposition to these types of programs is that it would reduce spending on already strapped public schools. And I think some people have kind of alluded to that already on here. Oklahoma currently spends, as far as the state budget goes, about a third of its budget. I think that's correct, on K through 12 education, right? So about a third of the budget on that. That amounts to about $10,000 per student. I think the exact number is more like $9,500 or thereabouts. Now, again, that is just the state's appropriation, the legislature's appropriate. That doesn't include the property taxes or the federal funds that come in. So that's the state appropriated amount. I believe that is at $9,500 to $10,000 per student. So my question is, and this is for anybody who wants to answer it on the panel, but for those who are concerned about funding, what is the optimum level of funding for our education system? In other words, what's that level of funding that we're going to get the most out of our students, that our teachers are going to be compensated appropriately, that we're going to have the resources dedicated to support those students, that type of thing. What would that be? And just as importantly, how do we determine that? How do we know what that amount is? I'll start with those two questions. I think those are really, to me, that's always been on the back of my mind is, well, how much is the right amount? And how do we decide what that is? So I'm going to let some of the others go. We had Ryan and Lucia go first last time, so I'm going to let Melissa or Gabrielle or Jenny, if you want, any of you guys who want to jump in here first on this one.
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, great.
It's a tough question because I think in my mind with our current situation, our current teacher shortage, I think the amount of funding that we need is whatever we need to be competitive, especially regionally, to be able to pay our teachers. And again, I've got a graph. I'll send it in the chat or email it to you. But our regional funding of school choice is we're doing great. We're number one in the region for funding school choice options. I just think it would be nice to have that distinction for funding our public education system, since it serves 90% of the students. So when we are not hemorrhaging teachers to other states, and it's going to change. As soon as I gave you a number right now, I read an article that Texas is proposing a $15,000 pay raise. Arkansas is proposing a $10,000. Right now we have a national teacher shortage that is working against us, but we have to stay competitive. And that holds true for private schools. I mean, they need teachers as well. So we have to stop the hemorrhaging of our teachers, which that also goes beyond just the funding. We need to start changing that negative rhetoric that we hear about our teachers. And well, we just need to treat teachers like respectful professionals. But I did want to point out on that funding, the 9 or 10,000, I know that level changes too, depending on the yearly numbers, but that does include the local dollars. So part of what is collected locally goes into the funding formula, and that's what the funding formula does, is equalizes those local dollars, so that a district that might be heavy on ad valorem is offset by a district that's heavy with gross production taxes, or so everybody's local dollars goes into that same pot, and that's what the formula is designed to do, is equalize it and spit it out as a per pupil number for every district. So I just wanted to clarify that the local dollars don't go on top of that.
Thank you. Gabrielle or Jenny, either of you want to add anything on top of that?
I can add a little, like Melissa said, I don't think there's an exact number that's like our dream goal number. That means we're properly funding education, but I can say that Oklahoma has been investing less and less in public education, even when we have a record investment. When you look at public school spending, when you account for inflation and population growth, we're still spending 16% less on education than we were in 2008. So despite recent increased funding to education, we still rank 47th in K through 12 per pupil spending. And so we really can't afford to fund two different education systems, one on public and one on private, both on the taxpayer's dime. Private school vouchers undermine public schools by diverting desperately needed resources away from public schools, which accept all students, to fund the education, again, of just a few voucher students. Some people say that vouchers will produce savings because the voucher is less than that per pupil expenditure, but any of those potential savings would be undercut because, the majority of people who claim vouchers are students who never attended public school in the first place, meaning the state will be paying new education fees that were previously being paid entirely by the private sector. But again, choice doesn't have to mean privatization, but it does require that we adequately fund our public school system. By investing more in public schools, we're offering broad choices to all children and families so that every child can find the best fit within their neighborhood, regardless of zip code, again, or ability to pay.
All right. Would anybody else want to, Ryan or Lucia or Jenny, any Go ahead.
Well, I thought I might just chime in. I mean, I know it's a little off topic, but it's interesting that there's one belief that it's privatizing education, and yet we believe it's actually publicizing or making public private education. So I think that's interesting, just the way that we look at both sides. And I have to say that as a small government organization, and we've always been, a small government, small tax organization. It's kind of bemusing, and I know this won't be popular here, but it's always been bemusing to us that one year it's we need this much money and we get this much money, but then we need more money, and then it just it continues to skyrocket. And as a person who homeschooled for quite a number of years, I do find it interesting to note, and I will say, I haven't looked at the stats on this recently, but I do know that the last time I looked several years ago, homeschoolers actually tended to do better on standardized tests than public school students did with less funding. So I always have a problem kind of in my head, having been a public school teacher who stopped teaching because I just couldn't stand all the regulations and it just didn't feel any fun to teach anymore. But having been a public school teacher and then being a homeschool teacher, I think we personally, from my perspective, we can do a lot more with less, and administrative costs keep going up every year in the public school. And we have teachers that have assistants that have assistants that have, and we're getting a lot of administration and not enough money funneling into the classroom. So I think once we can finally parse out that argument, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. In the questions that you sent us, you sort of ended with, if the ideal optimal level of funding was ensured, would it take this objection off the table? And the answer is, of course it wouldn't. And that's sort of self-evident by the answers that have been given so far. There was whatever we need to be competitive. I can't give you an exact number, no number, potentially zero. But the reason this will never be taken off the table is sort of, it's already been said. It says, well, this takes money away from public schools. Well, the reality is the public school advocates believe that every dollar that isn't devoted to public schools is something that takes money away from public schools. So I think we could probably come up with a number. Nobody's willing to do that because tomorrow it would be different. It would be higher. But the reality is, public schools don't accept all students. There are some really good public schools in Oklahoma City, but Deer Creek is not going to accept every student. Like they just can't. So like the same limitations that apply to public schools as they do to private school options. A lot has been brought up about how much we spend compared to other states in the region on private school options or choice options. Anything you spend compared to zero, as some of our surrounding states, is gonna sound like a lot. But for every $100 that's been spent in public schools, we've spent 6 cents on the Lindsay Nicole Henry program for special needs students. So it's not as though it's even like they're even in the same ballpark. So yeah, color me skeptical that if whatever the magic number is was provided for, that this objection would cease to be an objection. And the idea that a voucher program is going to go to kids who are already in private schools, that's really only a problem to those who are willing to disregard the present discrimination against parents who send their kids to non-public schools. So for me, that's not a problem.
Okay. Lucia, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes. So I think obviously it's hard to come up with a number, but I think the most important thing is, which I think we all can agree on, because told you, sunshine and rainbows, is the outcomes of our students. And making sure that where we're investing our money, whether it's in our public school settings, our private school settings, and whatever funding mechanism that is used, that it's for student betterment, that our students are getting the resources and being taught the way they learn, and that our teachers are receiving the professional development that they need. Because my kids have dyslexia, literacy is really important to me. And I'm sure all of you have heard about soultostory.org. If you haven't, I would encourage you to check it out. But it talks about how this whole balanced literacy approach and how it was having these really negative outcomes. And it was this beautiful, it looked beautiful, like it should work. It's magic. Kids are going to be in these beautiful environments and magically learn to read, and this will work. Well, then research came out and it wasn't working. And so now we have to retrain our teachers, who are amazing and wonderful and have so much on their plates, to make sure that we are ensuring our children know how to read. And I think our state is making great steps across all educational choice avenues. But I think that if our students' needs aren't being met, then, and we're not spending the money that really has a positive outcome for our students, then that's where we really need to look. So I don't know if it's a magical level of funding. I'm more concerned about our students receiving the education that they need, and do our parents feel like their students have all the opportunities that they need to be successful. So I'm not trying to give like a non-answer, but I think that's really at the crux of all of this, is making sure that our students are getting what they need and figuring it all out together to make sure that every single student receives the proper education that they deserve.
All right, thanks. I'm going to let, as I did with the previous question, if Melissa or Gabrielle or want to respond real quickly to anything, I'll give you each about 30 seconds to do that. If there's something you'd like to respond to, if not, we will move on. Good. All right, Melissa. Nope.
Oops. No, I think the only thing that I would say is it is public schools exist to serve all students. And so the example of Deer Creek not being able to accept all students, we have the same issue with the open transfer in Jinx. We just simply have no space from these. We are absolutely, we are honored that so many people would like to transfer their children into our school district. Truly, it's an honor. And we just don't have space. We are having trouble keeping up with building the classrooms and following the demography studies of what's being projected for the next 10 years. So public schools, there does have to be boundaries. You need to live in the district. If we have space, of course, the open transfer would be wonderful. But we also, this is my board member hat. I have an obligation to the patrons who live in our school district, and we can't accept people who don't live there and then ask our patrons to build buildings, to keep building classrooms so that we can accept more students that don't live in the district. So that's a hard thing. I mean, I assume that's what Ryan was meaning with his example of Deer Creek, that they don't have to accept all students, because the fact is, if they live in the Deer Creek district, they do have to accept all students, everyone who walks through the door. A child who's got a behavior problem, a child who has unengaged parents, anybody who walks through that door, it's our purpose to educate them. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right. All right, I'm going to combine these next two questions, so in the order to move us forward a little bit, but they basically deal with this idea. Jenny has brought this up a couple of times now. I've heard others bring this up as well. I especially hear this in the homeschooling community, like Jenny, and I think Ryan did mention as well. We've homeschooled our children. So I hear this a lot in those communities, a lot of concern about the level of regulation that it would accompany tax dollars going to private education or homeschoolers. Now, and I know, and I don't know if the legislation that's been offered, I'll be honest, I haven't read what has been offered for this session. I know the last session, they amended the bill to basically remove homeschooling families from that eligibility for that, if I remember correctly. So that has been one of the concerns, is what level of regulation would accompany those tax dollars into these private entities. And I want to layer on top of this the other question, which is about all of the fights that we're seeing over public schools right now. What kind of content can be taught in classrooms? What kind of books can be on the library shelves? What kind of what is the correct curriculum for various things? My question is, given that we're seeing these battles already over these things, would the expansion of school choice via these mechanisms that we've been talking about, again, ESAs or vouchers or whatnot, simply expand those fights into other arenas? Or, as I've heard others argue, it would actually reduce those fights because people, if they were not satisfied with the curriculum that's being taught in one school, could freely move to another. So that's my question. Again, I'm going to go back and let Ryan and Lucia jump in first, and then the other three follow on that. So for you guys, I really want you to explain why this wouldn't further exacerbate existing disputes we have over all of this content, all of this regulation that we have on public schools already. It wouldn't expand that to these private alternatives.
I'm happy. Sorry. I have laryngitis, so all the talking. I apologize, my voice goes out. So again, my whole Sunshine Rainbows approach in wanting to collaborate and be for everyone, because I just want to be clear that at ECHO, we are for parents, we are for students, we are for teachers, we are for everyone, and want the best education possible for every Oklahoma student. So I think school choice, I think it can help alleviate conflicts over what is taught in schools by allowing parents to have complete control over where their children attend school. I think transparency in curriculum and collaborating as a team will help improve educational outcomes and create a better future for Oklahoma. And let me further explain that. So what I mean by that is making sure, like I talked about before, the outcomes of our students, making sure that the way that they're being taught and what they're being taught is what's best for them and the way that they learn best. So to make sure that, you know, what we're teaching them, how we're teaching them, the type of curriculum that we're teaching them has a positive educational outcome on them. And the difference of, you know, the whole balanced literacy, science of reading, which I think we can all agree on with that shift. So I just want to be very, very clear on that. And I do agree, our homeschool families have fought really hard in our state to have control over their child's education. And I completely respect that. And I completely understand wanting to hold their ground and make sure that that's not infringed upon. Because I know, like, Jenny has worked tirelessly for years and is an amazing person. I think you all are amazing what you do and how much you love kids. And I think it should be a parent's decision whether or not to accept funding. And I also don't think anyone wants to hand over a blank check. We definitely need accountability and checks and balances to ensure that the funding that goes with the student is directly benefiting that student. So that does need to happen. We need transparency and audits and checks and balances to make sure that the money is being spent how it should be and wisely across all school settings, across all educational pathways. And we also want to make sure that we're not micromanaging either. So there does have to be that balance, because we don't want to turn schools and parents away from utilizing a desperately needed program. And I also want to make sure that for parents who choose their own pathway other than public schools, we also want to make sure that we're not inadvertently denying other parents the opportunity to have their own choices too, even if those choices are different from our own. So that's when I say I'm for everyone, that our family exercises two different choices, because both and I want to make sure that every other parent has that same opportunity and that same right to choose what they feel is best for their student, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters, is doing what's best for Oklahoma kids.
Thanks, Professor. I'll try to be brief. So for the first question about, is this going to allow too much government intervention? Under the bills that are currently filed, the answer is no. In addition to loads of protections, including things that I normally don't support, like a private cause of action. Like Lucia mentioned, at the end of the day, this is an opt-in program. So if, this is not, Jenny earlier brought up the comparison of federal dollars. Well, that's kind of the whole point of that discussion, right? It's like we can opt out of those federal dollars if we feel like they come with strings. Same with current homeschool families and private schools. If they don't want to be subject to whatever regulations may be added to them, they don't have to participate. And we already see the schools that everybody wants to talk about how a voucher wouldn't help you get into Cascia Hall or Heritage Hall or Cassidy. Those schools, by and large, don't take advantage of these programs anyway. And there are schools that don't do that for whatever reason. It's their prerogative. Now, I will say that vigilance is the cost of liberty. Okay, like we have to be ever vigilant. The government, on the other hand, does not need a voucher program to come in and tell you how to run your homeschool. You can look at Europe to figure out that's not needed. My boss, Jonathan Small, has been coming to the Capitol since he was in elementary school because his parents were like Jenny, they were homeschool parents who were advocating for the autonomy of homeschool parents. So, the idea that we need to be vigilant, the idea that would start with a voucher program or ESAs is just not true. So like I said, vigilance is the cost of liberty, but hypervigilance that borders on paranoia is something else altogether. With respect to sort of curriculum debates and that sort of thing, in my view, yes, this would absolutely ameliorate that. Like other issues, it's not a panacea. It's not the one-stop shop, but it adds options. The reality is, from my point of view, I think that some of the concepts that are being taught in public schools are detrimental and harmful. But there are parents who absolutely want their kids taught that. Like there's make no mistake about it. Now, the state may have an interest in making sure that those sorts of things aren't taught, but there should be. I mean, the funny thing that one of the things that I always think is funny is when the opponents of school choice will say, well, what if I want to start like a Satanist private school? And I'm like, go for it. Like, do that. If you want to start, a private school that's like the school of CRT, however you define that, be my guest. Like that is now the parents' decision to choose that for their kid. So, but by the same token, if some things are being taught and parents are leaving and taking their state appropriated dollars with them, it may be the silver bullet that parents have not yet had, just trying to go to their local school boards and affect change that way.
All right. Thank you, both of you. So, so on the other side, so several of you, Jenny, I know you've been on this issue a lot. I don't know if you want to go first or if Melissa or Gabrielle want to jump in here, but let's talk about, are there concerns about that regulation? I know from Melissa's perspective, she's mentioned a couple of times, well, these schools already don't have the kind of regulation that public schools have. Does bringing those tax dollars mean that we're going to see that kind of regulation from your perspective? And is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So who wants to jump in here?
Well, I guess I can, since I'm the kind of the homeschooler of this bunch. I understand the idea that vigilance is the eternal price of freedom, and I get that. But what ends up happening is government creep. And I think there's a really good case in point that I would throw out right now. There was an article just in the Frontier. Oklahoma Watch Attorney General says vendor not to blame for misspent education relief funds. And in that particular article, I believe it was Jennifer Palmer of Oklahoma Watch who wrote that. They were talking about the fact that Class Wallet got gear funds. There were parents were actually gifted about $6,500 through the federal gear funds that were administered by the state. And basically now there's a question, because there's about a little over $500,000 that it seems like did not get used the way it was supposed to get used. Well, in this article, it actually states that the Office of Management and Enterprise Services, I'm not sure what they had to do with it, but they were calling parents who took advantage of the program and asking them what their purpose for these purchases were, and then also asked, were you homeschooling your children or were they still in school? Well, I mean, yes, I suppose that Ryan even could call me a little bit of a paranoid personality. But I think we've seen over and over again that once the camel's nose is under the tent, it just kind of pushes its way into the rest of it. And we can all say, oh, that's never going to happen. We're not going to ever let that happen. And he even did make mention, because I did read the bills and I have I know exactly what he's talking about in terms of these bills that say, there are sections in the bill that say, we won't allow a vendor to take over a state job, or we won't allow a vendor. Well, you'll have to excuse me here, but I kind of went through that whole Common Core thing where we worked really hard to make sure that we didn't have a federal curriculum in the state of Oklahoma, had the bill repealed or had it repealed from state law, and then found out that it didn't matter because the bill just basically allowed schools to teach whatever they wanted to teach. So I don't have a lot of confidence in that particular, because the bill says this or the bill says that. Sadly, I don't have that confidence. And unfortunately, my experience shows that of that confidence there. And I think we already have an example, like I just showed, of the fact that we're already asking homeschoolers or people whether or not they homeschooled or not. And I think, another thing too, that we, in terms of federal funds and federal funds kind of overstepping, one of the things that happened in 2019, Joy Hoffmeister, when she was superintendent, they convened a board meeting, and basically she tried to say that that schools taking Lindsay Henry Nicole scholarship funds had to comply with Clinton's executive order that prohibited discrimination on race, sex, color, national origin, disability, religion, age, sexual orientation, and status as a parent. And so that really would have made the private schools that took that had, some kind of a statement that students had to sign about their beliefs. It kind of flushed all of that down the toilet. Now, granted, that didn't stand because the Attorney General came in and then, kicked that idea to the curb. But that doesn't negate the fact that a superintendent tried to do that, and then a state board, the Board of Education, voted to accept that, and then the Attorney General had to come in behind and shut that down. So I understand that there are people who roll their eyes and say, you just don't want government to do anything. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, there are limits to what I want government to do, because I know government will encroach whenever possible. And I don't feel like, I get that vigilance is, important, but I don't think we as taxpayers, I don't think we as citizens should have to just sit on the edge of our chair having to watch everything to make sure that government doesn't usurp basic individuality in how we want to educate our kids. And if that means that we want to be home educators that don't take any kind of federal funding, and yet because some home educators took federal funding, now everybody suddenly is going to have to do X or Y or Z, I don't think we should be put in that position. So I think if you're a small government person, then these kinds of things overreach those boundaries. That's all I'll say.
Melissa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just, something that Jenny said reminded me of some things that we hear from parents. Sometimes it's about that why is that oversight? Why do we even talk about that? And it's because, for example, with our state testing program, we hear all the time, oh, we have to do this. We have to give schools an A through F grade because that's the only way that parents will know whether their school is good or not, which I don't agree with that premise. But that's what we're told. That's how we're marketed. You know, these types of oversight. So, okay, if I have a third grader in a public school, they're going to sit through these state testing programs. But all of a sudden, if I'm if I take a voucher and put my third grader in a private school, then I have no need to know whether the school is doing well or not. That just left up to my discernment. I can decide on my own. So you have parents saying, well, why would that be different? Why would we treat, if we're publicly funding all students, why would we treat students differently who choose whose parents choose a public school option versus those who choose a private school option? And I know homeschool is not subject to the testing, but that was just an example that popped into my head when Jenny was talking.
Thank you. Gabrielle, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so for your first question on, the battles raging over what is being taught in public schools or curriculum, I think it's become, pretty clear to a lot of us that a lot of these kind of battles have been part of a larger plan to, sow distrust in public schools and ultimately privatize public education. But if we were to really look at these, curriculum issues, like a year or two ago, the really big concern was critical race theory being taught in our schools. But because public schools are subject to public dollars and are accountable to the people of Oklahoma, our legislature acted pretty swiftly to pass legislation that banned critical race theory from being taught in public schools. So parents and the public already have a really immense say in what is being taught in public schools through the election and participation in school board meetings. Ryan kind of touched on, sometimes these elections are hard to participate in because they're on off days or people just don't know about them. But I think that's an area we can really work together on to make sure that more people are, participating and voting. And you can also, participate in a PTA or just communicate with other elected officials that represent you. So what is currently being taught in Oklahoma public schools is very much the will of the people and the state and the will of the parents in that school district. Again, none of those issues would be solved with a private school voucher, nor would private school vouchers solve the very real issues that our public schools are facing, such as learning loss due to COVID-19, school safety, bullying, teacher shortages, and transportation issues. And then on your question about, accountability, like many have already said, vouchers are unaccountable and lack oversight. Public schools, however, are subjected to federal, state, and local oversight mechanisms to track student achievement, document how funds are spent, and ensure that they're teaching curriculum that meets state standards. With so few, measures of oversight, accountability, quality control, voucher programs are often funding failing private schools. If you look at the program in Washington, D.C. and Milwaukee, 40% of schools that received private vouchers have already closed and shut down because they weren't effective. And so we've already seen this happen in Oklahoma too, like with Epic and ClassWallet. So private schools don't want to be beholden to the same rigorous standards placed on public schools. And that's really unfortunate because without adequate transparency in voucher programs, parents might be left in the dark about what's really going on with their children and unable to make a truly informed decision about their child's education. I also think that Jenny kind of touched on this, but religious freedom and liberty, my religious freedom means that I can attend a private school that matches my religion. And my religious liberty means that no one else has to pay for that and that the government can't tell me what that school teaches. Private school vouchers that doesn't align with that messes up that religious liberty aspect. So I think that's important in accountability and oversight as well.
All right, I'm going to try to speed through some of these audience questions so we can get out here. We went way longer than I promised any of you we would, and I really appreciate you hanging in here with us. We have a really good crowd that has stayed with us too, so I appreciate them doing that. So I'm going to kind of pick some of these questions and I'm going to assign them to one or two of you because I think some of them are very much in niche areas where each of you might have a little bit of expertise to answer these. Melissa, I'm going to start with you. We'll have a couple here that says, how is it possible for a school district and or teacher to teach subjects that have not been approved by parents? So I think this gets at, some of the concerns, and I know you're familiar with this, people who are concerned that something's being taught in their school that they didn't know was being taught. Maybe they have issues with, maybe they just want to know more about it before, so can you explain how do public schools walk through, what is it that we're going to be teaching, and where does parental involvement in that decision-making happen?
Sure. Well, I would just start with that, our teachers teach the Oklahoma standards, as do all public school teachers that are developed by, I don't know how many, but it's a lot of experts in the field and teachers that come together. And then those standards are adopted and approved by the state legislature. So, and I'm so sorry, they've decided to clean the carpets right outside of my office door. So I hope it doesn't get too loud. But so the teachers teach the standards. Of course, there are elective courses, there are AP courses that are outside of that standard, but we have the Parent Bill of Rights that says that every parent has the right to look at the curriculum at any time. So that's really all they need to do. That's in state law, but it's also required by state law for us to have that in our board policy and parent handbooks. So every parent signs at the beginning of the year that they've read the handbook, that they understand what's in there. So we want to partner with our parents and would put that on them at any time if they have a question about anything that's being taught. They have the ability and the right to be able to see that. And I would say the first step is scheduling that with the teacher. I'm going to mute real quick because here he's coming back down the hall.
All right.
So.
Okay. Let me go to Ryan and Lucia. Either one of you or both of you can do this. And this one is about capacity of private schools to handle an increased volume of students with vouchers, right? They asked that don't private schools already have waiting lists? And how would school choice not just add to the capacity problem that private schools see in that they already can't all accept as many people who want to get in? So I'm going to ask you guys, how would vouchers impact the capacity of private schools to accept additional students?
Yeah, I'll jump in because this is kind of one of my favorite topics because what we've seen in other states is that when you expand school choice options, you actually see more schools pop up. So we've seen in Florida over the last 20 years since they've introduced their school choice programs, enrollment in private schools double, including in rural counties, in rural Florida, not just in the cities. So that's a big talking point that frankly I'm not sure carries a ton of water. I mean, of course, the public schools in some of these smaller communities dominate those communities because there's not been a mechanism to help them have a real legitimate option. But a choice program would allow for more and more new schools to develop. And we've seen that in Oklahoma too. We've talked about the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship. We've talked about the Equal Opportunity Scholarship. We've seen schools that have popped up in Oklahoma that have only been able to do so because those programs exist. So, I can't speak to whether or not any particular school has a wait list or whatever, but what the free market shows again and again is when you allow people to have more options, more and more options will be made available to them.
Sorry. I agree with Ryan's point that hopefully it'll allow for more options. And like Melissa said, our public schools are also limited in option in their size as well. So my hope is that if we are seeing a particular segment of students whose needs are not getting met wherever they are, whether that's the private school or public school, whatever educational pathway, that we come together as a community to help support those students and see what we need to do differently, because if the way that we're teaching them is not the way the student is learning, then what do we need to do to adjust to that? And whether that's other schools popping up to meet those needs and the public school also working together to make sure that those students' needs are being met and bringing in other resources that they need to, and working in a really collaborative and innovative way that it can be both and in doing what's best for students and supporting them. And I'm probably not saying it as eloquently as any of you at all, but I really think we have an opportunity here to do education differently, and to do it with all of us on this panel and all of us across the state that care about education in a collaborative way that produces positive outcomes for our kids. I just think we all have different ways of thinking how to get there, but I do think we can do it together because all of our hearts are in the right place of doing what's best for kids.
And Lucia, real quickly, because someone asked this, and I think in your role, you probably can answer this pretty directly. Someone asked if there were known programs for low-income households in Oklahoma to look into private education for their child. And I don't know if you had mentioned the Lindsay Nicole Scholarship Program has an income threshold of some sort or something like that. Did I miss that?
Well, OSF is at the 300% of poverty level. Lindsay Nicole Henry doesn't have a threshold requirement. That is for students who are on an individualized education plan or have been served through DHS or some of the other determining eligibility areas. For IEPs, they do have to be in public school the year prior. I always start as a master IEP coach with working with the student that's in the school to make sure that they have the services that they need and they understand how it works, because it is, as anyone here can attest, education has its own language, and just understanding the language is the first step to understanding and advocating for your student. And beyond that point, if a parent feels that their child's needs aren't being met, letting them know about other opportunities that are available, about the wealth of options that we currently have in Oklahoma to make sure that their students' needs are being met. And again, like I said before, I serve families all across the state, and I would say 70 to 80% of them stay within their public school setting and just need help accessing those resources. And then some need something else because their school doesn't offer the particular program that they feel their child needs to be successful. But OSF has that limitation of 300% of poverty level, so for lower income. And then Lindsay Nicole Henry is based on the other determining factors, but income is not one of them. And you are able, depending on the school, to stack those together. But OSF is how much money that particular school raises, or that OSF has in its bucket that's donated by private citizens. So it does vary school by school, but most will try to work with parents to make sure that finances are not a barrier if their child is needing access to that particular education program. I hope that answered.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
I'm gonna throw this one out to Ryan and Gabrielle, because I'm sure you two are going to give me different answers, which is what I'm anticipating. But it is a question that you guys have all kind of hit on in one way or another, back and forth a little bit. But the question revolves around who actually would benefit from these vouchers. And the person states that 75% or more of voucher or ESA users were already in private education. I think Gabrielle mentioned a similar statistic in one of her comments. And so I'm assuming that what they're indicating is, well, this doesn't really increase choice because people who wanted choice are already taking advantage of it. So I'd like to let you two kind of give me your 60-second version of why that is correct or isn't correct. And I don't care who goes first. So whoever wants to jump in there first. Gabrielle, I think Ryan is saying you go ahead.
I was kind of waiting for him to go ahead, but I'll start. So yes, I mean, like I already mentioned, in states that have already implemented a similar voucher program, we have seen that they are overwhelmingly being used by students who were already in private school. I know, this was kind of that other question. current private schools are at capacity, and Brian and several other people have mentioned, well, if we have this choice, that'll create more options and more schools will pop up and give more options to students. But again, I also want to bring up that statistic about, the voucher program in DC and Milwaukee, where 40% of these schools or programs that popped up with their voucher program failed and are closed already. So just because we have options, are they quality options? Are they, are they good? Are they truly going to provide the best education for our children? And I think, I see other proponents of school choice bring up, kind of niche programs, really amazing programs like Positive Tomorrows. It's a school in Oklahoma City that serves students who are homeless. And it's a wonderful school. It's a wonderful program. Everyone should check it out. But it's important to note that there are homeless students outside of Oklahoma City. There are homeless students outside of Tulsa, and there are more in Oklahoma City that can go to Positive Tomorrows. So wouldn't it be amazing if the services that are provided by Positive Tomorrows, trauma-informed care, helping families access SNAP and Medicaid services, wouldn't that be amazing if all public schools had those programs so that all students could access them? And that's what we mean by true school choice. So that's kind of my answer on who benefits from school vouchers. It's the people already in the system, and we can provide better choice options for Oklahomans by investing in public education.
Ryan?
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of highlighted this a little bit already. The families that are already exercising some choice other than public schools are subject to a financial penalty, whereby they are paying for schools that their children don't attend, plus they're also footing the bill for whatever education option they're currently choosing. So, the problem of, well, this is going to be primarily taken advantage of by people who are already exercising choice is really only a problem for people who are willing to overlook that existing reality. I'm not willing to overlook that existing reality, so I don't see a problem even if that were the case. But at the end of the day, we don't know who's going to take advantage of these programs. There's really no way to say. At the end of the day, I don't think we should not give anyone, not expand choice just because not enough people of the people that we think should make that choice will make that choice. That was kind of a wordy way of saying that, but ultimately I kind of fall back on what I've said from the beginning. This is about choice, and some people are going to choose to stay in the school that they are in because they love their school, they love their teacher, they love the sports program at that school, and maybe all the voucher does for them is give them some leverage when they approach their school boards and say, look, if you guys don't change, we're talking about starting a micro school over here, and there are a dozen of us or 20 of us who are going to go start a micro school. We've decided we're going to do something virtual. So, and then the only other thing I'll say is, talking about schools that pop up and go away, the reality is failing schools, private schools, are a good thing. Because public schools can't fail, right? I mean, like, no matter what the results are, no matter how abysmal the outcomes are, they never fail, and that's part of the problem. Whereas in the real world, if a company doesn't provide adequate services or adequate goods to its customers, they go bankrupt, and that's a good thing. It allows other people who are more efficient, who can provide goods and services at a lower cost with higher quality, to come in and fill that gap. So again, that's not a bug, that's a feature as far as I'm concerned.
We're going to have to end on that note. Again, for all of my panelists, thank you so much. You have stayed here and discussed this. And I know, as passionate as we all are about this, we could stay and talk about this for a lot longer, but everybody has other obligations. And I really appreciate you taking your time to share from your knowledge, your expertise on this issue with the folks not only who are watching here live, but who will be watching it after the fact. And so thank you to all of you for sharing again with us. I think this has been very informative. I think you guys have laid out your arguments very well and provided very good information. And I believe that anybody who watches this will have a better understanding, at least of the issues surrounding this topic than what they would have otherwise. So thank you for being willing to help improve the conversation on this topic, at least from what I have seen, again, on social media. And social media is a horrible place to look for quality conversations, I know, but it's just so darn convenient. But thank you for doing that. We will make this available to the public after the fact, probably in a couple of days. Those of you who are going to shoot me links to some of the information you talked about, please do that. We'll make sure those are attached to the posting when we put it up. And for all of you who have been here watching and stuck with us this whole time, thank you for being that interested in what's going on in education in your state. I think that speaks a lot to your commitment as citizens, as people who are really concerned about the status of education in Oklahoma. So thank you for that. And hopefully we can do this again, maybe on another topic down the road. Maybe we won't be here as long, but hopefully we can do this again. I think it's been a great conversation. So thank you. And I will see you guys down the road, and we'll get this up as fast as possible. So have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you for those watching. And any of our panelists, I'd love to meet y'all for coffee anytime to talk more. I think you all are fabulous. So
Awesome.
thank you for being
Thanks,
here.
everyone.